We spend years assembling a specific version of who we are, only to find we have constructed a fortress with no room to turn around. The things built for protection often become the boundaries of a self-imposed confinement. Look at this workshop, perched on a high mountain ridge. Crystalline frost gathers on the glass pane in absolute stillness. Its growth represents a silent, creeping theft of space. In the absence of the world's noise, we are often left alone with a stranger, the version of ourselves we haven't yet learned to face. Elena is 28 years old, and her days are measured in the heavy, rhythmic hiss of a glass-blowing oven. 3 years ago, an illness took the precision from her right hand for 6 months. That brief window shattered her trajectory in the capital city. She fled here, to the edge of the world, to work in isolation. When she works, she moves with a fluid, geological certainty. She dips a heavy iron blowpipe into a crucible of raw silica dissolved at over 2,000 degrees. But the moment the furnace doors slide shut, the heat recedes and she freezes. She stands perfectly still, staring into the dark corner of the workshop as the room returns to a gray, high-peak chill. Retreating from the world creates a silent, heavy vacuum. Within that space, the ghosts of former potential demand an accounting that remains unpaid. A rural postman leaves a single envelope on the bench outside Elena's door. It is a glossy invitation to a retrospective exhibition in the capital, celebrating the peers who stayed and continued their climb while she disappeared. She reads a name on the paper, a contemporary who once shared her studio space. Seeing that success in print reveals her mountain isolation for what it has become, a monument to her own retreat. For 2 weeks, the furnace remains dark. The crucible cools into a solid, unyielding block of gray stone. Elena moves through the cabin like a shadow, performing only the barest actions required to stay alive, spending hours sitting by the unlit stove. She eventually reaches for the flint striker with a surge of desperate resolve, but as the gas roars to life, the sound mimics the rushing of blood in her ears. The noise triggers the memory of the crowded exhibition hall she fled, and she shuts the valve down. When identity is built entirely on the avoidance of past failure, a single reminder of the outside world can cause a total systemic collapse. She is left with neither her former ambition nor her current sanctuary. At the far northern edge of the ridge, a textile dyer named Clara works in a rhythm synchronized with the mountain itself. When Elena arrives seeking wool for insulation, she finds the 72-year-old dipping skeins into a pale green fern dye. Clara's quiet efficiency stands in direct opposition to Elena's frantic, trauma-driven labor. Elena asks how Clara can keep stirring these pots when the world downstairs doesn't even know her name. Clara stops paddling and looks at Elena with a cool, investigative regard. She laughs, seeing the bitterness as a symptom of the grandiosity of youth. Clara operates without the need for an audience. Clara speaks of a bronze bell cast 3 centuries ago by a master founder. On the day it was hung, he struck it once. The sound was immense, but the strike created a microscopic hairline fracture within the lip of the bronze. Fearing it would shatter, the villagers never struck it again, leaving it to hang in silence for 200 years. During a severe, freezing winter gale, the massive wind swung the heavy bell violently against the stone walls of its ancient tower. This diagram shows how the wind's frequency perfectly aligned with the physical frequency of that ancient crack. Instead of a roar, the metal produced a continuous resonant wave, a low hum that guided lost travelers through the blizzard. The fracture changed the vessel's resonant frequency and shifted its audience from the crowd in the square to the wind itself. A perceived flaw can function as the exact mechanism required to process a harsh environment. Elena walks slowly back to her isolated cabin through the deepening dusk. The ancient story has altered the quality of her confusion, replacing her spinning panic with a vast, cool openness. She sits on her porch in the cold air, her palms facing upward, surrendering the need to hold on to the shape of what she lost. The next morning, she watches a tin kettle boil on the stove. The water yields to the rising temperature, transforming into steam rather than resisting the fire. She sees that the intense heat isn't an enemy, it is the energy source for the transition. She looks out at the freezing fog that has defined her life for 3 years. This exile was a crucible, providing the exact conditions necessary for a structural shift. Periods of deep isolation and immense internal pressure indicate the exact temperature required to change our structural form. Elena enters the workshop, clears the dead ash, and turns the gas valves. The ignition fills the room with a sharp blue roar. She ignores the whispered fear of failure, picks up the iron pipe, and begins to work. Her new creations abandon the thin, delicate aesthetic of her youth. They are heavy and thick-walled, with organic air bubbles trapped deliberately within the glass. The work possesses a weight that feels pulled from the earth rather than made by a machine. Her internal metric for success has shifted. She can sit in her workshop for 5 hours in absolute silence, entirely content to watch the cooling amber light fade within a glass bowl. She has developed a relationship with her own mind that is no longer dependent on news of her success. Holding these heavy vessels, she realizes that the girl who needed the capital's approval couldn't have carried this weight. By producing work that requires this new, earned strength, she finds that her former self simply has no place in this workshop anymore. Solitude is an architecture of pressure. This diagram of an annealing oven shows external heat stabilizing internal molecular tension. As heat slowly decreases, the tension forms a solid grid. This uncomfortable pressure prevents the vessel from shattering when exposed to the cold outside world. Many of us spend our lives trying to repair a flawless version of ourselves that was actually too fragile to carry the weight of where we are going. You have permission to let that old version go. Accept your scars as your foundational texture. Clear the ash from the grate and strike the match. The furnace is waiting, and the wind has already given you your tune.